At 70, the applause no longer drowns out the quiet. It echoes differently now, slower, heavier, carrying the weight of everything it once concealed. Denzel Washington stands at a crossroads few ever witness, a moment where legacy stops feeling permanent and begins to feel fragile. Fame had always framed him as unshakable, disciplined, righteous, immovable. But beneath decades of controlled brilliance lived a tension carefully managed, rarely named. Success had demanded restraint. Strength had required silence. In private moments, reflection arrives without permission. Memories resurface not as triumphs, but as unanswered questions about sacrifice, distance, and the cost of becoming an emblem rather than a man. What happens when the role that protected him for a lifetime no longer fits? When faith, family, and discipline collide with exhaustion and doubt. This is not the story of scandal or collapse, but of something more unsettling, the realization that survival itself can leave scars. At an age when certainty is expected, he confronts a quiet truth long postponed, one that reshapes how everything before it is understood. And the question lingers, unresolved and haunting. What did silence save, and what did it take? Silence arrives before memory. Not the comforting silence of rest, but the heavy kind that settles after a lifetime of noise finally recedes. At 70, Denzel Washington exists in a space few can see, a private stillness far removed from premieres, standing ovations, and ceremonial praise. Morning light filters softly through a quiet room, illuminating shelves lined with awards that no longer command his attention. They sit untouched, symbols of reverence that feel strangely distant. The world calls this legacy. Inside, it feels more like a reckoning. Publicly, he is regarded with near-mythic respect. His voice carries authority. His presence suggests certainty. Yet when the applause fades, unease remains. Gratitude coexists with discomfort, pride with fatigue. Years of unwavering discipline have crafted an image of moral clarity, but that same discipline required a constant narrowing of emotional expression. Strength was not just practiced, it was perfected. And perfection, over time, became a shield. The camera lingers on his stillness. His posture remains composed, even alone. Control has become instinctive. But beneath it, something presses upward, an unspoken ache that never fully healed, only postponed. Success reframes itself here, no longer as fulfillment, but as armor worn so long it fused to the skin. Every role, every achievement, every public expectation reinforced the same internal rule: endure quietly. Moments of honor replay in memory, crowded rooms, standing ovations, faces glowing with admiration. These images dissolve into quieter scenes. Hotel rooms after premieres, late nights when sleep refused to arrive, the low hum of isolation hidden behind acclaim. Applause once drowned out questions. Now, in its absence, those questions speak clearly. What was sacrificed to remain unshaken? What parts of himself were set aside in service of being exemplary? Psychologically, tension tightens. The traits that carried him forward, faith, restraint, unwavering composure, also demanded emotional containment. Vulnerability was not forbidden, but it was deferred. Feelings were acknowledged internally, then set aside in favor of responsibility. Over time, deferral hardened into habit. Habit became identity. A mirror stands quietly in the room. He pauses before it, not searching for flaws, but recognition. The face reflected back holds history, resilience etched into posture, restraint woven into expression. Aging sharpens perception. Time no longer stretches endlessly ahead, it presses inward. Longevity, once assumed to be proof of balance, now reveals its own deception. Survival alone did not guarantee peace. The atmosphere grows heavier, not with regret, but with awareness. This is not collapse. It is confrontation, not with critics, nor with legacy, nor even with time, but with the self that learned too early how to endure and too well how to remain silent. He does not look away. The mirror holds him there, steady and unflinching. A realization forms slowly, almost reluctantly. The most difficult role he has ever faced is not written, rehearsed, or applauded. It waits quietly, asking a question he can no longer postpone. What truth has he avoided long enough to now demand acknowledgement? The past returns not as nostalgia, but as architecture, the unseen framework that shaped everything that followed. Long before stages and scripts, childhood unfolded inside a world governed by order. In that household, structure was not optional, it was law. Morality was clear, expectations precise. Young Denzel learned early that composure was not merely encouraged, it was required. To remain steady was to remain safe. The environment carried contradictions. There were moments of warmth, measured laughter, shared meals, a sense of belonging rooted in faith and routine. But beneath those moments ran an unspoken current of pressure. Emotional expression was narrow, carefully contained. Strength was praised. Sensitivity was not condemned, but it was quietly sidelined. Feelings that could not be justified were absorbed rather than expressed. Pain was not dramatized, it was internalized. Fear was not discussed, it was disciplined into silence. Psychologically, this was the education of restraint. Self-worth became tied to behavior, to excellence, to control. Approval arrived through compliance, through doing what was right rather than saying what was felt. Over time, this equation hardened into belief. To be valued, one must be composed. To be loved, one must not burden others with inner unrest. Distance formed not through neglect, but through conditioning. The setting oscillates between stability and tension. Order provided safety, but it also narrowed emotional range. Love existed, but it was structured, measured through guidance, correction, expectation. Within that balance, something subtle was learned. Vulnerability carried risk. Silence carried approval. Performance entered his life quietly, almost accidentally. Acting was not initially rebellion, it was permission. On stage, emotions could exist without consequence because they belonged to someone else. Anger, doubt, longing. These were acceptable when scripted, applauded, contained within character. For the first time, expression did not threaten order. It enhanced it. Performance became a sanctioned release, a controlled channel through which buried feelings could surface without breaking discipline. Yet even here, identity fractured. The public self, expressive, articulate, emotionally fluent, expanded. The private self remained guarded, trained to observe rather than reveal. Applause reinforced the division. Expression was rewarded, but only when performed. Authentic vulnerability stayed hidden, preserved behind professionalism and poise. In hindsight, the pattern becomes clear. Achievement functioned as validation. Silence functioned as safety. The very discipline that cultivated resilience also limited emotional flexibility. Strength became synonymous with endurance, not openness. Control eclipsed curiosity. Questions were postponed in favor of certainty. Foreshadowing settles into the narrative like a shadow lengthening at dusk. These early lessons did not disappear with success. They traveled forward, refined and reinforced by acclaim. The foundation was solid, but narrow. As adulthood approached, the structure held firm, yet left little room to breathe. The chapter closes not with accusation, but recognition. Looking back, a quiet realization forms. The discipline that built him also defined his boundaries. And beyond those boundaries waited a conflict he could not yet name, one that would follow him, patiently, into the life he was still becoming. Success does not arrive gently. It comes with momentum, carrying him forward faster than reflection can follow. Early recognition multiplies into opportunity, and opportunity hardens into expectation. Film sets replace classrooms, scripts replace questions. Denzel Washington ascends not only as a performer, but as a presence, calm, disciplined, dependable. The industry responds to certainty. The world elevates symbols, and he becomes one. The ascent is swift. Roles arrive in succession, each demanding precision, restraint, authority. With every performance, admiration grows more concentrated, more absolute. He is praised not merely for talent, but for character. Integrity becomes part of his public identity. Excellence becomes assumed. In rooms filled with noise, clapperboards snapping, crews moving in practiced rhythm, he remains centered, composed. The camera reads that stillness is strength. Yet beneath the velocity, loneliness takes shape. Fame compresses time. Days blur into production schedules. Nights dissolve into exhaustion. The space once reserved for self-examination narrows until it nearly disappears. Emotionally, imbalance sets in. Professional validation intensifies while personal stillness erodes. Applause arrives instantly, processing does not. There is no pause long enough to ask how this pace feels, only whether it can be maintained. Psychological pressure accumulates quietly. He is no longer only an actor, he is watched, judged, admired as a standard. Representation becomes responsibility. Each choice feels weighted beyond personal consequence. Mistakes feel forbidden. Doubts feel dangerous. To falter publicly would not be human. It would be symbolic. And symbols are not allowed to waver. The settings shift between motion and solitude. On set, bright lights wash over controlled performances, faces turn toward him with expectation. Off-set, private moments stretch thin. Hotel rooms humming with artificial quiet. Late nights where sleep hesitates. Faith and family provide grounding, anchors against drift. Their presence steadies him, yet pressure persists. Responsibility evolves subtly into burden. The need to remain consistent eclipses the need to be present. Admiration, once affirming, becomes isolating. Praise simplifies identity. Complexity is flattened into reliability. He feels gratitude, genuine and deep, but also a growing sense of distance, from others, from himself. Success demands continuity. The next role, the next project, the next obligation waits immediately behind the last. Stopping feels like failure. Rest feels unjustified. Cracks appear not dramatically, but subtly. Fatigue settles into posture. Relationships become guarded, conversations efficient. Fulfillment feels delayed rather than achieved. Always one step ahead, never fully arrived. Moments that should feel complete pass too quickly to register. The rhythm of life is forward only, relentless and rewarded. Foreshadowing sharpens in these quiet fractures. The pace that fuels ascent also prevents listening. Questions gather beneath the surface, unheard. What does this cost? Who absorbs what remains unspoken? The answers do not surface yet. Momentum carries him onward, insulated by purpose and praise. The chapter closes in motion. Another set, another role, another affirmation of excellence. But beneath it, a question forms, patient and persistent, pressing gently against the noise. How long can a life move forward without ever slowing down to listen? At the summit of acclaim, the view is deceptively calm. Awards line shelves. Respect follows him into every room. His presence alone carries authority, permanence, reassurance. To the world, this is arrival, the culmination of decades defined by excellence and restraint. But internally, pressure does not recede. It concentrates. Strength, once a necessity, now becomes expectation. Composure is no longer a choice. It is assumed. Every gesture is interpreted, every word weighed. He understands the responsibility intuitively. Being steady has meaning beyond himself. And so strength becomes a performance in its own right. Refined, practiced, unwavering. The cost of that performance is rarely visible, even to those closest to him. Emotionally, suppression deepens. Fear does not disappear, it is managed. Doubt does not erupt, it is redirected into work. When uncertainty arises, discipline answers it. Another role, another project, another structure imposed on feeling. Moments of moral clarity coexist with private uncertainty, each reinforcing the other in quiet contradiction. Certainty is presented outwardly, questions are handled inwardly. Spiritual discipline occupies a central role. Faith steadies him, offering grounding and order amid relentless scrutiny. It provides language for purpose and humility, for endurance and gratitude. Yet it also reinforces restraint. Vulnerability becomes something to be resolved internally, through prayer and reflection, rather than shared. Guidance sustains him, but isolation grows alongside it. The spiritual self remains strong. The emotional self remains guarded. Key decisions begin to shift subtly. Roles are turned down. Choices are reconsidered. Not as strategy, not as defiance, but as instinctive self-preservation. He listens more carefully to fatigue, to hesitation. The pace slows slightly, though the world barely notices. These pauses are not retreats, they are boundaries. Yet even boundaries cannot fully shield him from reckoning. Aging introduces urgency. Time narrows. The future feels less infinite, more defined. The margin for postponement shrinks. Questions once deferred return with greater clarity. What has silence protected? What has it delayed? The image remains intact, admired, unchallenged. But beneath it, something unresolved presses closer to the surface. The setting grows quieter. Fewer crowds. Longer evenings. Reflection becomes unavoidable. He notices how easily people project certainty onto him, and how rarely they ask what it costs to maintain it. Loneliness here is not absence of people, but absence of permission. Permission to falter. Permission to speak without resolution. Psychologically, confrontation takes shape. Not dramatic, not explosive, firm and unyielding. The realization surfaces without accusation. Silence has served him well. It has preserved dignity, focus, control. It has allowed survival in spaces that reward composure above all else. But it has also postponed healing. What was delayed in the name of strength has not disappeared. It has waited. The darkness of this chapter is not collapse, but clarity. There is no scandal, no public unraveling. Only the steady understanding that endurance alone is insufficient. The very discipline that once ensured survival now risks stagnation. Silence, once protective, begins to feel restrictive. He stands at a fragile edge, not between success and failure, but between continuation and change. The question no longer whispers. It steadies itself, demanding consideration rather than avoidance. If silence no longer serves its purpose, what replaces it? And what must be risked to answer honestly? The chapter ends there, on that edge, where strength is no longer defined by restraint alone, and the cost of remaining silent becomes as significant as the cost of speaking. The pace finally softens, not because the world has stopped asking for him, but because he no longer answers every call with urgency. In this quieter chapter of life, reflection replaces ambition as the dominant force. Purpose begins to shift, not dramatically, but deliberately. Achievement loosens its grip, and presence takes its place. The setting grows intimate. Morning light settles gently into familiar rooms. Family voices carry warmth rather than expectation. Faith exists not as discipline alone, but as companionship, something walked with rather than relied upon for armor. Public life continues, but it no longer defines the rhythm of his days. Appearances are chosen, not endured. Work becomes selective, meaningful, unhurried. Emotionally, the tone is somber yet grounded. Acceptance replaces resistance. There is no grand confession, no public reckoning. The psychological resolution arrives quietly, through acknowledgement. Limits are recognized without shame. Humanity is embraced without apology. The quiet truths once avoided are no longer adversaries. They are companions, understood, if not fully resolved. Aging is portrayed not as erosion, but narrowing. The excess falls away. What remains sharpens. Relationships deepen. Silence changes texture. It is no longer imposed by expectation or fear, but chosen with intention. The chapter reframes silence, not as weakness, but as discernment. Some truths no longer need to be spoken to be honored. Others are held gently, no longer hidden, simply private. Legacy separates itself from identity. Influence is understood as something lived, not curated. Perfection is no longer required to matter. He recognizes that presence, steady, imperfect, attentive, carries its own weight. The roles that once defined him now feel complete, even as life itself remains unfinished. Psychologically, peace does not arrive as permanence. It arrives as practice. Some days feel light. Others feel reflective, unresolved. But there is less urgency to resolve everything at once. The need to endure silently has softened into the ability to remain present honestly. The camera lingers on stillness, shared meals, quiet walks, moments without audience. These scenes carry more meaning than applause ever could. The absence of spectacle becomes its own reward. The story does not close with certainty. There is no declaration, no final answer. Legacy remains unfinished because life remains ongoing. The question lingers softly, without demand or fear. After a lifetime of restraint, can peace be learned, or must it be earned anew each day? The screen fades not to conclusion, but continuation, where restraint has transformed into awareness, and silence, once endured, has finally become a choice.